A woman named Irene and her friend head to a local bar, looking for something new to try. Suddenly, a guy named Franklin catches Irene's eye. He walks over and starts talking to her. Years later, Irene and Franklin are now a sweet old couple who love spending all their time together. They live in a quiet, remote house far from the noise of the city. Since they are retired, they don't have work to worry about and focus on enjoying life together. One night, Irene tells Franklin she wants to look at the stars. He takes her outside in her wheelchair. They go to a shed near their house, move a table, and reveal stairs that lead to a basement. Then they take an elevator to a theater located on a strange planet with a stunning view of the sky. Next, Franklin reminds Irene that this is their 856th visit to the place. Even though the view is amazing, he says he is getting tired of keeping it a secret. He wants to tell their granddaughter, Denise. But Irene believes there is a reason why they were chosen to visit this place. She asks him to go through a door they have never opened before, but Franklin reminds her that a mouse didn't survive even a minute after being taken through it. When they return home, their new neighbor, Byron, sees them. He wonders where they have been because he has noticed them going to the shed many times. The next morning, Franklin takes Irene to the hospital for her checkup. Irene has been in a wheelchair ever since she fell last year. Meanwhile, Byron tells his wife, Janine, about what he saw. Janine tells him she found their granddaughter, Denise, on Facebook and messaged her about the situation. At the hospital, Irene meets her doctor, who tells her that her symptoms are getting worse and she needs more tests. While Irene is at the doctor's office, Franklin goes to the grocery store. While shopping, Franklin gets a call from Denise, who tells him she is in town to visit. Later, Franklin meets Denise. She tells him about the neighbor's concerns and asks him to consider selling the house and moving somewhere safer. Franklin refuses and insists they will stay. After her checkup, Irene visits the nursing home to see her old friend. There she meets Chandra, who was once her student in high school. Chandra takes Irene to see her friend Sadie, who is battling Alzheimer's and dementia after losing her husband. That night, Franklin is late picking up Irene. He takes her home and explains he got distracted because he met Denise. Later, Byron tells his wife he plans to run for councilman in the town and heads out for his usual evening walk. During his walk, he sneaks into the couple's shed, but finds nothing unusual. Meanwhile, Irene makes Franklin promise that if she dies before him, he will sell the house and leave, taking its secret with him. After spending a romantic evening together, Irene writes a note to Franklin, telling him she has decided to go through the door alone. She then heads to the shed by herself. Next, Irene takes the secret elevator to the platform and opens the first door, which leads to a second door that opens outside. But before opening the second door, she hears grunting behind her. She turns and is shocked to see a man lying on the floor. Irene quickly leaves the shed and finds Franklin, telling him there is someone inside. Franklin goes back to the shed and finds the injured man. He brings the man into the house and calls the police. However, Irene tells Franklin the man came from the other side of the door and asks him not to report it. Next, an officer named Thomas arrives at their house, and Franklin tells him the man ran away. Thomas insists on checking the house just to be sure. Irene covers for Franklin, saying he has been seeing things lately and that no one is bothering them. Thomas leaves, feeling sorry for Franklin. On the other side of the world, a woman named Stella and her daughter Tony live a traditional lifestyle raising llamas. Tony travels miles to attend high school, where she spends time with her crush, Matthias. That evening, Matthias visits her home and is amazed by how remote the house is. Tony explains that her family has lived there for generations, and her mother refuses to leave for reasons she won't share. Later, Tony takes Matthias to a church next to their house. She tries to kiss him, but he stops her, admitting he only came because of a dare. He tells her everyone believes her house is haunted because there's a rumor her grandfather practiced a cult there. Suddenly, Stella enters the church, shouting at Matthias to leave. This angers Tony, and the two argue. After they leave, Stella returns to the church alone. She opens a hidden compartment that leads to a door, similar to the one in Franklin's shed. Meanwhile, the couple looks through the stranger's belongings but finds no ID. They notice the man shaking with a high fever. Irene remembers she had similar symptoms when she fell and tells Franklin to get more of the medicine that cured her. After Franklin leaves, Irene searches the stranger's belongings again and finds a picture with the name Gabriel on it. Meanwhile, Tony struggles with loneliness because she has no friends and lives in a remote area just to protect an old church. She tells Stella she thinks it's meaningless. Stella explains that their family has been guardians of something special for centuries and promises to reveal the secret when the time is right, but Tony dismisses it as foolish. Suddenly, Stella gets an alert on her phone about movement near their home, and they rush back. Back at Irene's house, the man wakes up and says his name is Jude. He doesn't remember much about himself, but recalls being near mountains before Franklin found him. When Franklin returns with the medicine, he meets Jude for the first time. That night, Franklin tells Irene he suspects Jude is hiding something because the blood on him isn't his. Irene, however, believes Jude might be the key to the answers they've been waiting for and vows to find out the truth. Meanwhile, Stella reaches her house and finds the front door open. Armed with a gun, she enters and meets a familiar man named Cornelius. He asks her if she has been training Tony as she should, revealing he knows about the secret Stella is keeping. Back at Franklin's house, Franklin speaks with Jude and tells him the room he is staying in belonged to his late son, who died by suicide when Denise was just 5 years old. That night, Jude secretly steals the letter Irene wrote to Franklin before going to the shed alone. He removes a capsule from his leg, which appears to be a tracking device, and destroys it. Then he heads to the shed. The next morning, Franklin takes some gold coins found in Jude's belongings to a local pawn shop. He learns the coins are from Spain and date back to the 1700s. Meanwhile, Cornelius gives Stella a special mission and insists that Tony accompany her, saying she needs to learn the truth. Later, Franklin brings new clothes for Jude, and the three of them go to a cafe for breakfast. After eating too much, Jude gets sick and throws up in Franklin's car. Back at the house, Jude takes a bath, and Irene finds a strange object in his room that was causing the lights to flicker in their home. She doesn't think much of it and gives Jude his clothes. Next, Jude starts to have flashbacks of his past life. In the memories, he is being chased by a man. Meanwhile, Byron continues his campaign to run for office, but is caught forging signatures after people ignore his efforts. He suspects Franklin reported him because he knows Franklin doesn't like him. After spending the day with Jude, Franklin takes him for a drive. He offers Jude money, telling him he's a good con man, but it's time for him to leave. Jude refuses the money and walks away, which leads Franklin to invite him back to the house instead. Next, Irene starts investigating the strange object she found in Jude's room. The object is a small sphere with a glowing orange center. When Irene places it on a glass table, it vibrates with strong energy, and the table suddenly disappears. She is interrupted by Denise, who visits after getting a job offer at the company where she's interning. At dinner, Franklin arrives with Jude and introduces him to Denise, saying he is their new caretaker. Denise feels suspicious of Jude but doesn't press further, as she has her own life to focus on and soon leaves. Later, Jude talks with Irene and tells her he feels he wasn't sent to their town by chance. He believes his father, Gabriel, who abandoned him, might be nearby. Meanwhile, Franklin finds the knife Jude used to remove the tracker from his leg. He also spots the tracker itself, which wasn't properly disposed of. That night, Byron comes home after a long day and decides to sneak into the couple's shed again. This time, he discovers the secret entrance and ventures inside. Meanwhile, Stella decides to reveal the truth to Tony. She takes her to the secret chamber beneath their church. Unlike Franklin's shed, their door operates differently. Stella uses a tablet to input coordinates written in strange symbols. The elevator activates and takes them to a new location. They climb out on the other side of the world to Newark, America. There, they walk straight to a man named Nick, who doesn't seem surprised to see them. The next morning, Jude goes to the backyard and buries the strange object. While outside, he runs into Byron, who asks if anything strange is happening with the old couple. Jude ignores the question and returns home. Later, Franklin, Irene, and Jude visit the public library to search for Jude's dad, the man in the Polaroid. While there, Franklin steps outside and visits Thomas, asking him to run a fingerprint search on Jude using a cup Jude drank from. Thomas, however, refuses, reminding Franklin that Irene said he's been imagining things. Frustrated, Franklin storms out. The librarian finds records of Gabriel, showing he has been arrested multiple times for sleeping in parks and shoplifting. Meanwhile, Stella and Tony spend the night at Nick's house. In the morning, Nick helps them with their assignment using his machine, which reveals a serial number. He translates it into a vast location but agrees, at Stella's request, to narrow it down to the source of the signal. Seeing how confused Tony is, Nick realizes she hasn't been told the full story. Stella insists Tony is still too young to understand. At the same time, Irene asks Jude why he hasn't shared anything about his past life. Jude says he isn't ready to talk yet. While Franklin is out, Chandra visits Irene. Recently fired from her job as a caretaker for stealing from elderly clients, Chandra offers to work for Irene and Franklin. However, she notices they already have Jude working for them. While no one is watching, Chandra sneaks into Jude's room and steals some of his belongings before leaving. Later, Jude answers a phone call at Franklin's house. It's the pawn shop owner, who says he's found a motivated buyer for the coin. After getting the buyer's number, Jude calls him. The man speaks in Spanish and asks to see the coin, but Jude hangs up. That night, Jude realizes some of his belongings are missing. He finds Chandra's business card among her things and goes out to look for her, but gets lost. He ends up at a bar where he runs into Denise and her friend Katie. Denise has stayed in town longer than planned to take a break from the stress of work and school. Meanwhile, Franklin meets Byron. During their conversation, Byron admits he has seen what Franklin is hiding in the shed and demands to know what it is. Franklin tells him it's just an old bomb shelter. When Byron doesn't believe him, Franklin says it's a doorway to space. Byron thinks Franklin is delusional, so Franklin takes him to the shed to prove it. However, when they use the elevator, nothing happens. Franklin is confused, but Byron leaves, calling Franklin a fraud. Later, Irene wakes up to find both Jude and Franklin missing. Worried, she gets in her car to look for them. Meanwhile, Jude leaves the bar and wanders the streets. A police officer spots him and gives chase. During the chase, Jude has a flashback to a past incident where he stabbed a man who was chasing him. As Jude is taken to the police station, Irene happens to drive by and follows them there. At the station, Irene speaks with Jude and demands the truth. Jude explains that he grew up in a compound where he and others were controlled by a group to protect the secret of the doorways. He reveals that the doorways don't just lead to the planet they visit, but are connected to many other similar portals. He also confesses that he killed the man chasing him while trying to escape because he had no other choice. Next, Irene then talks to the police officer, persuading her to release Jude. Afterward, Jude tells Irene that Chandra stole his belongings, and Irene promises they will get them back in the morning. Meanwhile, Nick takes Stella and Tony to a cell tower to amplify the signal and pinpoint the location they need to investigate. On the way, Nick shares his theory that the doorways work by using interconnected invisible particles, making teleportation possible. Stella, however, believes the doorways are a gift from God to humanity. When they reach the cell tower, Nick puts on safety gear and climbs it. However, a worker arrives unexpectedly, and Stella knocks him out and ties him to his car. Tony is shocked, as she has never seen her mother act this way. The next morning, Irene and Franklin visit Irene's doctor for her checkup. The doctor is surprised to see significant improvement in Irene's health and tells her that she is able to stop using the wheelchair. She advises her to continue doing whatever is helping her recover. Later, Denise visits her grandparents' house but only finds Jude there. The two spend time together until Irene returns. Meanwhile, Franklin, frustrated that the elevator didn't work, gives Byron a roll of film to develop, claiming the photos were taken during their visit to the mysterious planet. Later, Franklin takes Denise for a drive, while Irene takes Jude to Chandra's house. Irene and Chandra have a private conversation inside, where Irene sees the house is filled with stolen items from the nursing home. Meanwhile, Jude sneaks into Chandra's bedroom and finds his belongings, including a tracker identical to the one he removed from his leg and a necklace. Jude confronts Chandra, believing the tracker might have belonged to his father. Chandra admits to stealing the items, claiming it is her way of being compensated for her hard work caring for the elderly. Byron collects the developed film and sees an image of Irene in the theater, gazing at the stars. Meanwhile, Irene and Jude are returning home when Jude tells her about the tracker and the stolen items Chandra took. He identifies one of the stolen items as a tablet used to navigate the doorways. Later, Irene teaches Jude how to drive, while Franklin and Denise visit Michael's burial site, Denise's father. Denise confides in Franklin that she feels trapped between school and work and wants to quit everything. Franklin reassures her, saying he will always support her no matter what. Meanwhile, as Stella, Tony, and Nick travel toward the source of the signal, Stella remembers a place where her mother was killed by her father. Tony asks Nick if he knows anything about her father. Although Nick knows him, he avoids answering, believing Stella kept it a secret for a reason. Next, Byron is searching for answers and finds an online article about hidden doors, including a sketch of a similar door. Armed with this information, Byron goes to Franklin's shed to investigate and shares his findings. He tells Franklin that a similar door was discovered over 300 years ago in Argentina, where Stella and Tony live. While examining the shed, Franklin notices bloody fingerprints on the control panel of the door and realizes Jude was there and took the sphere. This explains why the elevator didn't work when he and Byron tried it. Next, Byron returns to the spot where he first found Jude and uncovers the sphere buried there. That night, Franklin finds Irene's letter in the trash and decides to leave the house and spend the night at Byron's. Meanwhile, Stella, Tony, and Nick stop at a motel for the night. Stella catches Nick demonstrating what appears to be a levitation device to a woman, possibly related to his research on the doorways. Stella tells the woman to leave and scolds Nick for being reckless. The next morning, Byron shows Franklin the sphere he found, explaining that Jude buried it in their backyard. However, Franklin is no longer interested and heads back home. Meanwhile, Denise quits her school and job, telling Katie she wants to move back to the town. Jude and Denise later track down a man named Bill, whom Jude believes might know something about his father. Bill inspects the tracker and reveals it belonged to his father, who was a truck driver. Bill shares a story about his father, who got this tracker from a hitchhiker he once picked up. Jude then realizes the hitchhiker is his father. Next, Byron returns to the shed and places the sphere back into the control panel. However, the panel doesn't work, so he tries to jumpstart it. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas finally investigates Jude's fingerprints after learning he was arrested. He discovers that Jude has been in and out of psychiatric institutions. Thomas goes to Irene's house to find him, but Irene tells him she has already fired Jude. Elsewhere, Nick, Stella, and Tony have lunch together. During the meal, Nick starts talking about Stella's past, which angers her. She punches him in the face, steals his car, and drives off. Tony, refusing to go further without answers, demands to know what signal they are chasing. Stella explains that it's a man who was once a keeper of the secret but broke the law. Meanwhile, Jude and Denise return to Franklin and Irene, announcing they might have located Jude's father in Michigan, only an 8-hour drive away. Irene speaks privately with Jude, showing him the files Officer Thomas brought. Jude claims these records are fabricated by the people controlling everything. He reveals that trackers were originally embedded in their bodies, revealing he removed his from his foot. Next, Irene prepares to travel to Michigan, and Franklin tells her that no matter what happens, he will wait for her. After she leaves with Jude and Denise, Franklin and Byron successfully jumpstart the control panel. A shock wave spreads for thousands of miles, killing birds near the area, and the machine begins to work. The elevator then takes them to the theater. Byron is awestruck by the stunning scenery and notices a door that leads outside. He asks if they can go through it, and they decide to buy the necessary equipment to build spacesuits. Meanwhile, Irene, Jude, and Denise arrive at the location where Jude's father might be. A woman named Hannah answers the door and says she knows Gabriel, but doesn't know where he is because he left without a word. Disappointed, Jude feels defeated, but Hannah offers to tell them stories about Gabriel if they stay the night, and they agree. Elsewhere, Stella and Tony reach their destination and start posting pictures of the man they're looking for. It turns out to be Jude. Tony asks why Jude is wanted, but Stella says she was only told by higher-ups that he is dangerous and knows nothing more. Back at Hannah's house, Irene grows suspicious of her and shares her concerns with Jude, who is too focused on finding his father to listen. Meanwhile, Hannah secretly goes to a hidden compartment where a man named Paul is monitoring phone calls in and out of the house. Paul informs Hannah that Irene is Franklin's wife, the same Franklin who had the golden coins. It's revealed that Paul is the mysterious buyer who left the Spanish message for Jude. Byron and Franklin finish building the suit, and Byron puts it on, preparing to step outside the planet. Meanwhile, Jude finds a book that belonged to his father and discovers a combination of symbols that might serve as coordinates for the tablet. Next, Tony finds a video of Jude at a bar online when he was with Irene and Katie. Stella decides to track him alone, warning Tony it's too dangerous to come along. Stella follows the trail to the bar and then to Chandra's house. However, Chandra refuses to cooperate unless she is paid for the information. Meanwhile, Irene, Jude, and Denise leave Hannah's house, unaware that Paul is following them. Back at the planet, Byron steps outside while Franklin stays in the theater. Byron wanders too far and disappears after a few minutes, leaving Franklin shocked and alone. Next, Stella returns to Tony and finds Cornelius there after Tony called Nick for help. Stella updates Nick on the situation. At the same time, Irene, Jude, and Denise return home, where Franklin is still in shock over Byron's disappearance. Jude continues studying his father's book, while Irene takes Denise to see the doorway. However, Denise doesn't believe her and leaves. Next, Stella, Cornelius, and Tony go to Chandra's house, where Cornelius forces Chandra to reveal Jude's location. Afterward, Cornelius kills her. Meanwhile, Jude discovers that his sphere is missing and confronts Franklin, who was earlier questioned by Janine about Byron's disappearance. Next, Stella, Cornelius, and Tony find Franklin's house, but Cornelius notices dead birds nearby and realizes there may be another doorway close to the area. Jude tells Irene and Franklin that he plans to leave and search for his father. As he drives away, Cornelius spots him and orders Stella to track and kill Jude while he and Tony look for the doorway. Next, Cornelius finds Franklin and holds him at gunpoint, forcing him to take him to go inside the house. Meanwhile, Jude goes to Denise to thank her for everything, but Stella suddenly shoots at them. Jude tells Denise to return to her grandparents and take them somewhere safe. He then runs, making sure Stella follows him. Denise hurries back to her grandparents' house but finds Cornelius holding them hostage. Irene tells Cornelius where the doorway is to stop him from hurting Denise. Cornelius gives Tony a gun and heads to the shed to check the doorway. While Cornelius is gone, Irene convinces Tony that none of them, including Jude, are violent. Cornelius returns and finds Tony about to free the family. He stops her and tells her that not everything is as simple as good and evil. He assures her that he won't harm anyone if she doesn't want him to. Then, Cornelius calls Stella, telling her to bring Jude to the couple's house because he has the family hostage. Stella, still chasing Jude in the woods, shouts to him about the situation, and Jude decides to surrender. Stella takes Jude back to the house, where Cornelius beats him up. Cornelius then orders Tony to shoot Jude to prove her loyalty. Stella steps in, takes the gun, and says she will do it instead. However, Stella refuses to shoot Jude. Franklin charges at Cornelius but is thrown aside. Jude gets up and tries to fight Cornelius but is overpowered. Franklin then strikes Cornelius with a metal bar, and Stella uses a taser to stun him. Stella and Tony load Cornelius into the back of their van and drive away. Stella tells Tony they will have to be on the run for a while, but with Cornelius captured, the pursuit will eventually stop. Next, Jude decides to continue his search for his father, and Denise chooses to go with him. Jude uses the control panel and his tablet, entering the coordinates from his father's book. The couple watches as Jude demonstrates the extent of the doorway's capabilities. After saying their goodbyes, Jude and Denise leave. Meanwhile, as Stella and Tony drive away, they are pursued by another car. Their van flips over, and they are captured by Hannah, Paul, and their men. Blindfolds are placed on Stella and Tony, and Hannah greets Cornelius, revealing herself to be a runaway like Jude. She blinds Cornelius as well and takes them all away. Next, Jude and Denise travel to Bangkok, following the coordinates from Jude's tablet. Back at the house, Franklin tells Irene about the adventures he shared with Byron and shows her the suit they built. He explains his plan to use the suit to find Byron. Franklin suits up and steps outside the planet to look for Byron. He finds the body of the man Jude killed while traveling here lying on the ground. But suddenly, Franklin begins to lose oxygen. Franklin collapses, unresponsive to Irene's calls. Worried, Irene follows Franklin to the planet without a suit. To her surprise, the air is breathable. She hurries to Franklin, removes his helmet, and helps him regain consciousness. Together, they begin exploring the planet and are shocked to find tall structures covering towns that resemble Earth. The couple realizes they might have missed a great discovery by not venturing out earlier. Whatever secrets this planet holds remain to be uncovered by the two of them. The old couple, who once spent their days in quiet routines, became the ones to travel farther than anyone ever imagined, discovering not just new worlds, but a deeper bond with each other. The end. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you.